So it's for them really to get into the weeds of traffic and whether or not that might be a problem. And if so, they can set conditions and try to fix the problem before it happens.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to that whole, like, we got to go through the step-by-step process, and it's the right thing to do because somebody's interested. We should be happy that there is a out-of-town developer interested in building something here, especially since it could be beneficial to a certain demographic in our community that we need more of, and we need to retain them. They need to be here long enough, participate in the tax life of our city, participate hopefully in starting their own businesses to be here. For some of them, to create a critical mass of new employment, entrepreneurial, activity. I had at one point in my former position mentioned, I tried to get in touch with the developer. I don't know if they were interested or not, so I did not hear from them, but mentioning adding amenities to the site, like Makerspace amenities or other types of amenities that might be attractive specifically to this demographic that we're talking about.
You should explain, Scott. You should explain what Makerspace means, because some people might not.
Sure. So for the listeners who are not familiar with that terminology, a maker's space is generally some type of private, for-profit or nonprofit business that allows in largely, not largely, but many times in a former industrial space, or you might create a new public space at like a community center at a new apartment complex like this, where people can come in and they can participate on an affordable level in various types of craft, anything really tactile. And it can be industrial as well, right? So you have industrial maker spaces that have a forge. So if you want to learn how to be a blacksmith, you can literally go to a makerspace, because this is something that might not be easy for you to do at your house. You might want to be into pottery, but you don't own an automated pottery wheel or a kiln. So you go to the makerspace because you can pay an affordable monthly membership fee, and it's basically providing you studio space and tools and the expensive stuff like the kiln and so forth. And it makes all of that possible. So having amenities like that, first of all, we should have lots of amenities like that in Gardner, period. But this is a way in which you're using it to leverage the improvement on, in this case, an apartment complex or a condo complex, to make it more attractive to that demographic that you want to attract to the property. And,
especially since it's a fairly large.
By the way, I'll point out to our listeners. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's a fairly large development. I mean, it's 3 buildings and it's 123 units. So, I mean, something like that, it seems like it would work perfectly because you've got the audience, so to speak. You've got the people there. It's not like you're talking about an apartment with 10 units or something. The user space or the maker space might not make sense for something like that, right? It's a smaller development.
Yeah, you build it. Well, yeah. Well, if it would, if you had multiple units of, say, 10 apartment complexes, and you put it in an equidistant place, a central place that's equidistant to all those various localities. Right. That would be the equivalent of putting one in some building that's where it's appropriate, close-ish to where Parker Central and Main Street meet. Right. What we generally consider the center of our industrial, the heart of the city. You put it somewhere there because it's equidistant to a number of places for people to park, and people that walk can get there pretty easy, that kind of thing, right? So these are typically proven to be one of many types of amenities that attract just that group of people we're talking about. And I have to say, for that matter, there's a lot of mixed use and 55 plus developments that also include these type of amenities, because whether people are hobbyists or if they want a second career in retirement doing something more craft based, I always wanted to, make leather seats for motorcycles, and I never had the time to do that. Now's the time, right? And then you bring in people that can teach them the skill, and they're off, they're off to the races. They have their little place there,
Right.
Anyway, one of many things you can do.
So the other thing I wanted to mention about this possible development and it's coming up. The meeting is we're having a joint meeting Monday night, City Council and Planning Board. I think it's at 6:00, but it's on the city website. I think it's 6:00. But
Yeah, take note because we're going to want to include that on this week's episode's web page.
yeah, I think it's 6 or 6:30 this Monday. So the other thing about this development would be that, so for so long, that property hasn't been on the tax base, if you will. I mean, they're just paying real estate taxes at this point. Now, if you're putting 123 units in there, obviously that tax base is going to increase significantly with a development like that. So the danger of saying no to the overlay is that the developer just walks away. And it stays dormant for God knows how long now, another 15 years, another 20 years. Meanwhile, it's not on the tax base, and it's still a moonscape is basically what it is now. So that's the other angle on it.
This is something that over time, I'm sure will keep coming up, both when we're talking about particularly local politics and maybe even some national politics, and listeners to our sister podcast, the SMGs Are We Here Yet podcast, which deals with economic development and urban planning, have heard me and many of my guests a million times over talk about these very things. Why on earth? The only organic way to build our tax base is to do so through our commercial tax base or developments like this, okay? Why on earth now that's assuming that it's a moral project, that it is not destroying the environment in any way, so assuming that it's quote unquote a healthy project, the only way to do it is through organic growth of your commercial tax base. The only other ways to do it is to poach businesses from somewhere else. You almost never can do that and have them pay taxes, okay? So that doesn't help. That's just more mouths for municipal budgets to feed, needs for sewer, needs for power, needs for, roads,
Yeah.
okay? Now we need more infrastructure, but we have less people paying for it. Or you do it on the backs of your residences, which is never a good thing politically. It's not really all that fair.
Which is basically
argue.
what we're doing now.
Which is basically what we're doing now. This is a big problem. Gardner certainly is not the only former mill town doing this.
And they're going to keep going up, and they're going to keep going up. And
while at the same time, we're largely attempting, even if we make any attempt at planning and development, to poach large corporate businesses from afar. And the only way you can do that is by incentivizing them with either more infrastructure or lack thereof, reduced or no property taxes for a certain period of time. So you're building insolvency into your business plan when you do that. Because by the time those free taxes or reduced taxes are up, the infrastructure you built needs to be fixed. Now you have no money to fix it. That Walmart or Kmart or this Mart or that Mart's probably saying to you, we're going to leave and move on to the next town that poached us unless we get another 20 years in free or reduced taxes. And even if that doesn't happen, what kind of work do we want to create for our populace? Okay. We had people in our town, which was based on craftsmanship, not only making good money, but the work that they were doing was by and large very meaningful to them. Oral traditions, right? Of passing on
Gardner,
the work.
Gardner, it was art.
Gardner.
It was art.
It was an art. That's right. It was
Absolutely.
entirely based on craft. And we replaced that with jobs at Walmart or Pub 99. Or now I'm not putting down those businesses.
Just go on eBay and try to find some, 1930, 1940s vintage Hayward Wakefield furniture. It's off the charts expensive because it's art. You can't get it anymore.
And it was made with pride, and therefore it was made very, very well. It's lasted 70, 80, 90, 100 years.
Yep.
We replace those jobs with work that is drudgery and less meaningful. This is
It's not just Gardner, though. It's not just Gardner. I mean, that's what we're seeing in all these post-industrial cities and towns, and all throughout New England. But Gardner is a perfect example of it, but not the only example, obviously. I mean, even if you go out west, especially Pittsfield, and Greenfield, Athol, Orange. Just go down Route 2.
it is truly an American problem. It's not just New England. It's not just Massachusetts. It's all over the country. Nonetheless, it is a problem. And it's a problem, of course, we can solve. There's a step-by-step we can be doing in a way to
Yeah,
concentrate on the right things as opposed to doing things the wrong way that doesn't work for us any longer.
it's more salient though, I think, in the Gardner area, because New England is obviously where this country began, and almost from the beginning we started these cottage industries here, making chairs and furniture. So in the Industrial Revolution started in, what was it, Lawrence, or was it Lowell?
No, actually it was
Pretty much started.
for our region, it was Pawtucket, Rhode Island.
And
You
then
want to
up
get
in
technical.
Lawrence from Massachusetts. But if that's start virtually
The first company town, I only know this because I lived there for 10 years. Lowell,
yeah.
Massachusetts was the first planned industrial community in Massachusetts.
Right.
And one of the first in the country.
So that's why it's particularly hard to stomach when you tie it in with a history of the country, and then losing your identity the way Gardner did with the furniture and the chairs. It was like that's tough on us older people here that grew up with the furniture industry. I mean, at one point in Gardner there were 77 of varying sizes, 77 furniture manufacturing in places in Gardner at one point. I think in 1920 or 30.
When I first moved here in the early aughts, I had heard from several sources that at one point in time, just prior to the Great War, that somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of all institutional furniture was produced for the United States here in this one city, which is, our population is more or less hovered around 20,000 for at least a century, right?
Yeah.
There's like 20,000 people living here. Many more, I'm sure, had to take a trolley in, because they had to come from the farmers' fields in the neighboring towns, because that's some serious employment going on.
That was huge.
Yeah, and of course it lasted longer here than most of the other mill towns around us, because the city was a little bit more diverse. It was not necessarily one trick pony, and because that industry was based on craft, it's very hard to replicate that in overseas. And so this industry lasted a lot longer here, even though it was in decline for many decades. It lasted a lot longer than much of the machining industry did in Fitchburg, or plastics has done remarkably well in Leominster, but even there, of course, it had to shrink, and the industry that's left there had to really retool and focus on new markets and new products in order to survive.
Right. The only other industry I think that stayed around a little bit, and of course it shrunk as well, as paper. Fitchburg was huge with paper, and that company is still, I think, there's some relative of that Crocker mill still. I think it's related to the paper factory that's in Irving. That's that company. But at any rate, they're still around. But then they get the rivers.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. Fun little fact, not related to politics. Turner's Falls, Massachusetts, is a planned utopian industrial community, and it was built by Crocker himself. It was one of his last experiments, and he based it in part on the concept for the utopian industrial village known as Shawshene Village, which is a section of Andover, Massachusetts, where I almost bought a building last year, until COVID destroyed the business that would have been in the building. But Cam, our producer, is familiar with the location, has been working for me then too. Anyways, Wood was his last name. I can't remember his first name, but the gentleman there in textiles and woolen textiles that created that utopian village in 1920, Crocker patterned some of his industrial concepts on his idea of the utopian industrial village. That's Turner's Falls, Massachusetts. And that's why
his railroad went right by there.
That's right.
His name is on a bank or something, right? A bank building, is it?
A couple of the buildings downtown, yeah, you'll notice there's a Crocker Business Association building. There's another Crocker. There's a couple of them that that were named or the cornerstones were laid in his name.